The death penalty is a controversial issue for many people. A lot of people have very strong feelings about it either way. But having the death penalty on the books is not as black and white as it first appears, and that's what we're looking at in this video. Who has it, who doesn't, but importantly, who is in the middle? Before we begin, we post death and dying related videos every Friday, so if that sounds like your kind of thing, consider subscribing to the channel. Now let's talk the death penalty. In this video, we are not looking to argue whether the death penalty is right or wrong. I feel that would be a pretty pointless exercise. Instead, we are going back to basics and asking the who, what, when, where, why, and how of it all. So let's get to it. Abolitionist countries. These are the countries in yellow. Currently, there are 114 abolitionist countries, meaning countries where the death penalty is not allowed by law. Venezuela, Portugal, San Marino, and Costa Rica were the first to get rid of it in the 1800s. Panama, Ecuador, Uruguay, Colombia, Iceland, and Germany all got rid of it in the first half of the 1900s. Now, we're not going to go through all the countries, but some interesting ones to note are that Vatican City abolished it in 1969, although they only had it in place since 1929, and no one was actually executed during that time. Australia officially got rid of it in 1985, with our last execution taking place in 1967. Most ex-Soviet countries quickly got rid of it after the collapse of the Soviet Union in the 90s, and interestingly, the last people executed in the UK was in 1964, and the death penalty for murder was permanently suspended in 1969, but it wasn't officially taken off the books for all crimes until 1998. Abolishment of the death penalty is also a precondition for entry into the European Union. Retentionist countries. These are the ones in solid black. Currently, there are 56 retentionist countries, meaning they retain the death penalty by law and are actively using it to some extent. In 2023, the countries with the highest number of executions were China, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Somalia, and the USA, in that order. As an asterisk to that, we don't know how many executions North Korea or Afghanistan undertakes, because it's not like they're telling us that. And while it is estimated to be high, experts still think that it wouldn't be anywhere near as high as China's, which makes sense considering the population difference. China executed at least 1,153 people in 2023. However, actual numbers are considered a state secret, and experts believe it to be much higher. In the same year, Amnesty International confirmed 853 executions in Iran, but again, it's expected to be higher. Saudi Arabia had 172, Somalia had 38, and the USA had 24. It should be said that the first 4 countries execute the convicted very quickly, so there isn't much of a backlog, whereas the USA currently has 2,241 people on death row. As for the other 51 retentionist countries, many of them rarely use the death penalty. India is a great example of this as a country that only executes the worst of the worst, usually terrorists with multiple victims, serial killers, and most recently, the 4 men that gang raped a woman to death on a bus in 2020. Experts reason that retentionist countries can be placed into 3 broad categories. Those with ridiculously high rates, such as China, Iran, and Saudi Arabia, and probably North Korea if we're honest, are countries that want to get rid of people, who had the possibility to disrupt the power dynamic of a dictatorship. It's not so much about the crime. The second category are the ones with big numbers, the USA for example. These appear to be countries that don't want to look at the underlying issues and clean up their act. It's much easier to say that person was evil and get rid of them. Prosecution over prevention. But they are also democratic countries who believe in the rule of law, unlike the first group. The third category is those with very low numbers. They are the ones who want to keep it on the books for those cases where they feel it is absolutely necessary. The majority of retentionist countries would fall into this category. The midway countries. So you will have noticed quite a bit of grey on this map. Remember when I said having the death penalty on the books wasn't as black as white as it first seemed? Well, here we are. So there are 9 countries in light grey. They retain the death penalty only for unordinary, serious crimes like those committed during war. There are then 23 countries in dark grey that they have the death penalty on the books still, but they haven't executed anyone in at least 10 years. Many of these countries are in the process of abolishing it completely, but changing laws takes time. Current methods of execution. Sticking with the big 5 here, China uses lethal injection and firing squad. In Iran, legal methods of execution include hanging, stoning, firing squad, and falling from heights. Yeah, apparently that last one is actually written down in law, not just convenient. However, hanging is by far the most used method, with the others rarely being used. In Saudi Arabia, execution could be by firing squad or by beheading by sword, but it's usually the latter. Somalia's case is a bit different as it has no stable government and the death penalty is often enforced by non-state militants. Stoning, beheading and firing squad are on the books as being legal methods of execution, but firing squad is used the most. Then we have the USA, which is forever complicated in its laws united my arse. Okay, so the federal government and the military had the death penalty on the books, as well as 27 states. But for some of them, it just depends on which governor they have at the time, these including California, Pennsylvania, Oregon, and Arizona. Ohio and Tennessee appear to state that they are holding off on the death penalty until a more efficient method can be found. And as a non-US person, I was very surprised to hear that California was a death penalty state. I didn't expect that. 23 states do not have the death penalty. But speaking of methods, it really does depend on what state you're in versus what you get. With lethal injection, firing squad, lethal gas, hanging and electrocution all on the books somewhere. But lethal injection is by far the most common. Juvenile executions. Amnesty International states that the use of the death penalty for crimes committed by people younger than 18 is prohibited under international human rights law. The following countries have ignored this and sentenced under 18-year-olds to death penalty since 1990. Take a look. Not a great list to find yourself on. The USA has sentenced 19 juveniles to death since 1990. Of course, due to the slow process of appeals, none were actually under 18 at the time of execution. Without that slow process, many of the other countries executed these juveniles while they were still juveniles. At its worst, Saudi Arabia and Yemen both executed 13-year-olds in 1993, and the Congo executed a 14-year-old in 2000. So that's where the world is at with all of that. If you put your opinions aside for a moment, it is very interesting to look at one of these maps and look at the similarities and differences between the different countries that have and do not have the death penalty, whether it be culture or government style. On paper, some of these countries do not appear to be in the right category, but there they are. Which country surprised you the most? Let us know in the comments. And with that, go talk death.